All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Sobre Mesa, the show that aims to break down the formal barrier between students and professors by conversing with a different faculty member each week about their personal interests, research in their respective field of study, current events, among other interesting topics, all while enjoying from a different dessert every week. My name is Ruben Maya, and with me is my friend and co-host, Jay Clore.
Hey, good morning, Ruben.
And with us today is Director of the Center for Latina Latin American Studies, Dr. Jorge Chinea.
Buenos días. Good morning to everyone.
So, Dr. Chinea, how about we start today by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do here at Wayne State?
Well, I was born on the island of Puerto Rico many moons ago. Came to the United States 1967. Got my education in New York City. Studied at Binghamton University in upstate New York. Came to the Midwest in 1983. Attended the University of Minnesota. Finished my doctoral degree there. 1996, I decided to go east again. I ended up in Michigan, where I have been for the last 21 years. I currently direct the Center for Latino and Latin American Studies, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned to us before this show that you used to work at a radio station in college.
Yes, I had good memories of my days at the radio station. We started there back in 1978.
Mm-hmm.
I had just returned from a study abroad program at the University of Puerto Rico, where I learned a great deal about the island's history and culture. I was anxious to share that knowledge with other people, so I approached the radio station. They gave me an opportunity, and I remained there for a long, long time.
Cool.
So you studied abroad in the country that you were actually from?
Yeah, it was a little odd because the people in Puerto Rico kept saying, "Why are you studying abroad if you were born here?" And I told them that I was raised in the United States. So technically, I was going there as a countryman returning to his roots.
Right.
And I took a bunch of courses. I went to Puerto Rico as a psychology major, and I returned as a Latin American and Caribbean studies major. I fell in love with the history.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. That's how I feel right now, actually. I was born and raised in Mexico, and I haven't been able to study abroad in my college years, but technically I feel like I am studying abroad because I'm doing all my collegiate years in a different country.
It's always a good idea. In fact, as a result of having been in Puerto Rico that full year, I have always advised students to study abroad. Go anywhere that you can, because once you become engaged in the job market and as a family person, your options are a little more narrow. And so while a student, take advantage of the opportunities to go to Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, practically anywhere where we have programs. We have 35 study abroad programs at Wayne.
Mm-hmm.
So there's opportunities there for a lot of different countries to visit.
So from your experience in college in New York, what are the key differences that you've noticed from their campus culture compared to our campus culture?
In Puerto Rico or New York?
In New York.
I went to the CUNY system, and then I went to the SUNY system. So I actually had an opportunity to try out the City University of New York, which is, community college chain of colleges. And then I had an opportunity to go to the State University of New York. I have to say that the CUNY University system at the time that I attended had a mixed bag of campuses. Some were more competitive than others.
Mm-hmm.
LaGuardia was really good at the time. Hunter College. I went to Bronx Community College. It was a very small community college, similar to Henry Ford or to Wayne County Community College District. Then, after I spent 2 years there, I applied for and transferred over to the State University of New York system, and it's an entirely different world, much more competitive, much more financially equipped. And they offer programs even at the doctoral level. At the CUNY system, not many campuses offer anything beyond the bachelor's at the time.
Throughout this time, were you studying psychology at the?
Yes, out of necessity, as a matter of fact. Since I grew up in an impoverished community, I saw a lot of blight and a lot of destruction. I saw a lot of addictions. I saw a lot of violence. I myself participated in some of that environment because I was part of it. But when I went to college, I decided that I was going to try to do something about that problem. So I thought that if I get into the minds of people, if I study their motivations, I could possibly help them overcome some of those challenges. So I studied psychology initially.
So what happened when you were in Puerto Rico that made you change your mind?
It started actually in the United States. I had already an interest in culture, even as a Latin American student studying psychology. And I was surprised to learn by trial and error as you take courses that a lot of the courses that I was taking did not reflect the psychological approaches and methodologies and uniqueness of different parts of the world. I studied Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud and John Locke and David Hume. All of those were important figures in psychology, but I thought that, whatever happened to African ways of psychology or Asian ways of psychology, Latin American ways of psychology, American Indian ways of psychology. I really wanted to know how other people thought about the same issues that we were studying in the classroom, and that was not available. When I went to Puerto Rico, that became even more real to me because I started taking courses on the island and I started raising questions in the classroom. In fact, one of my professors did not appreciate my enthusiasm for change, and he asked me to tone it down. I told him, but this is a history of psychology class, and we're only talking about the European and American thinkers in psychology. It's inadequate. It's incomplete. And he said, but that's all we have. I said, well, we need to change it.
So what is the non-European psychology like?
Well, I thought that people like Mahatma Gandhi had a nonviolent approach that eventually spilled over into the American way of thinking. It affected the way Cesar Chavez on the Mexican-American side started looking at the world. He began fasting. He began peaceful marches, nonviolent approaches. I thought that was creative. Martin Luther King embraced Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy. I thought that there must be more than just Mahatma Gandhi in that part of the world. There must be something other in China. There must be something other in places in Africa that we can learn from. For example, in the Caribbean, we have African-derived religious beliefs and psychological sort of ways of thinking that they're not integrated into the standard study of psychology in universities in the United States and Europe. And I thought that was a missed opportunity, for us to embrace the full range of the humanity. And it bothered me so much that when I came to the United States, I immediately turned to Latin American studies. I figured that if I'm going to be a good psychologist, I need to understand culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so I began to study the history of Mexico. As a matter of fact, was my first class.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, and it was taught by a Puerto Rican instructor.
That's funny.
Who had his bachelor's, master's, and PhD from Harvard University. He was a star at the university. And I took that class, and at the end of that class, I became convinced I need to know more about Latin American peoples. So I took a class on the Haitian Revolution in the African American Studies department. And then one thing led to the other. I started taking courses on slavery and plantations and about politics in Latin America. And then all of a sudden, I found myself doing well academically. As a psychology major, I was barely getting by. I was getting like a C+.
Because you were passionate about it, right?
Yeah, but I couldn't find I couldn't find that connection that would make that C minus or that C plus become a B and possibly an A. I wasn't finding it in the classes, so I was not giving it all I had. When I took Latin American Studies, I found that passion.
Hmm.
And then I combined Latin American Studies with psychology. I ended up doing a double major.
So have you been back to Puerto Rico recently?
I go back every so often. Initially, when I left back in 1978 after the study abroad program, I didn't go back right away
Hmm.
because I was a student. I didn't have the money. I barely was scraping to get by as a student. But once I got into the master's program, but more when I got into the PhD program, I felt the need to actually go back and revisit what I had seen as a student,
Hmm.
and really go back and reappreciate and reconnect, and that's the beginning of my full career.
Has their curriculum changed, you think, in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, well, in that day, things were really advanced even by that time. I was really surprised. We were taking courses on Latin American literature and Caribbean literature. We were taking courses on anthropology, but I also took courses in psychology because I was still a psychology major.
Hmm.
I came back. I mean, the teachers in Puerto Rico, some of them use English language textbooks, especially in psychology. And then the people in the humanities and the social sciences, they use a lot of Spanish language books. Had I been in finance, economics, or even law or pre-law, I probably would have been using English language textbooks. So it was my first immersion in Spanish, reading in Spanish and actually coming back to a language that I had when I left Puerto Rico in 1967.
Do you feel like it's different learning in Spanish than in English?
Yeah, it's a matter of fact. I remember when I came back to the U.S., and even before I came back to the U.S., I would take Comp 10, you remember? Or Comp
Speech class?
1000,
Yep.
yeah, the basic communications class, and or English composition class, I should say. And I remember that the instructors would often complain that I had a lot of run-on sentences, a lot of semi-clauses with commas. And so the sentence was almost like a third of a paragraph.
Okay.
But whatsoever, and then I'll go on and on and on. And he said, you need to have more declarative, shorter sentences. And I said, what do you mean more declarative? He says, more clear sentences. And I said, but in Latin America, we think this way. It's difficult for me to not explain something that I think about in that way, so I had to write it in that way. And it was funny because I was translating from Spanish to English simultaneously as I was writing. It wasn't like I was thinking about it.
And then translating.
Yeah, it was like immediately almost like an automated thing. Boom, English in Spanish, boom, or the other way, and write it in English. And so I learned later on that we have a different style of learning.
Hmm.
In the U.S., we use what we call linear thinking. We go from A to B to C. In Latin America, we use circular thinking. We think about an issue, we look at the background, we think about the consequences and the implications, and then we resolve the issue by talking about the solution. In the U.S., you go from the problem to the solution, and you don't circle around. And so the circling around was what he or she was referring as
Run-on sentences.
run-on sentences and a lot of semi-clauses in my writing. So I actually learned to become a good writer as a result of that experience. I began to use dictionaries and thesauruses, and then I began to really polish my writing. The other thing that I remember in college is that they asked me to take vocabulary building because my English was limited.
Hmm.
So they say. So they had me take vocabulary building. The problem was that I was scoring higher than the American kids in my class. And so the teacher could not understand that. So one time she said, we're wasting our time in this vocabulary building with you. You're scoring 95 or 97 when everybody's scoring 60 and 70. Why is it that you know some word in English that it stumbles the average student? And I said, that's because we study Latin in Spanish. The basis of Spanish is Latin, and Latin is the root word of a lot of the words that we use in English, at least a lot of the hard words. And so the hard words in English are easy for me. The easy words in English are a stumbling block for me.
Mm-hmm.
So if you tell me, let's start doing this, the word start has no connection in Spanish. If you say, let's commence the activity, I know that you mean let's start.
Comenzar.
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 Yeah.
If you say, let's terminate the activity, I understand exactly what you mean. If you say, let's end it, I'm lost.
Right. I felt the same way as going into my high school years here in the U.S. We had this word smart book in my AP English class, and most of the words, like you said, are the root of the word comes from Latin. So, like, instead of saying I'm chewing gum, you could say I'm masticating gum. And for most of the native English speakers, they don't understand what masticate means. But to me, it comes from masticar. You know?
Or alimentate.
Yeah, alimentar. Yep.
Alimentate means to feed yourself. It makes total sense to me. But to the average English speaker, it's like, wow, what does that mean?
Right.
Well, that's easy for me. So I always stumble with the easier words in English, and I excel with the harder words. And so that was a little confusing for my teachers.
Would you say you're a better English writer now than in Spanish?
In fact, I am.
Yeah.
Because I had to learn it through the dictionary. I didn't learn it by hearing, which means that I also missed out on a lot of the short stories and a lot of the classical books in American literature. When people talk about Huckleberry Finn, I don't know what they're talking about. But if you're talking about Albert Einstein, I could talk to you about Albert Einstein because I read his biography. But I missed a lot of the basic stuff, like Little Red Riding Hood and stuff like that. I don't know what's going on there. But if you talk to me about Marie Curie or Robert Oppenheimer or some scientists, I got into that. I like science. So it was an odd feeling because a lot of the basic stuff that people knew, I had no connection. A lot of the hardest stuff, I had a connection. So it was a mixed bag.
I think that's a good compliment. I mean, you don't know Cinderella, but you know Albert Einstein, I think.
It was really inspiring. And I tell you why I did it, why I got into science. When I came to the U.S., we didn't have much, obviously. And so I always wanted to have an encyclopedia. I could not afford one. I wanted to have a Britannica encyclopedia. I could not afford one. Then I wanted to have a Compton, which is a cheaper model. I couldn't get that either. So I would then venture out into the library, and I would sit in the library and just learn. And that was I was a nerd in that sense. The librarians would constantly see me at the library, kneeling down in a corner, reading books. I fell in love with the whole thing. I had a Mexican teacher who was a scientist in my 7th grade. And he showed me how to make a telescope, and then he showed me how to make a microscope and a telegraph. And I got heavy into science. Through him, I became a scientist in my mind. So I started reading on my own about Marie Curie and about all of the leading scientists. But I also had people in my community that were autodidactic. I never understood the meaning of the word. I asked them, I said, how come you know so much? He says, I'm autodidactic. Autodidactic? Oh, you mean self-taught. Oh, I didn't know that. So what does that mean? It means that I read on my own. And so he turned me on to Reader's Digest. At the time, it was like the biggest thing in the world. Today, nobody reads Reader's Digest. You ever heard about it?
See it at like the dentist office sometimes.
Yeah.
Magazines.
But that guy would sit me down and he said, you know, I know all the capitals of the world. I know the biggest rivers. I know the country's capital. You know, he would like explain these things to me. And on the stoops in New York City, in Harlem, in the front of the building, I would sit down and listen to this guy telling me these stories. there was a family from Ecuador. They would tell me about, the Arabian Nights. I had no idea what you're talking about. Mao Zedong, Mao Zedong. And they knew stuff in Latin America that I had no idea that they knew. And they would tell me about it, and I was like mesmerized listening to these folks. And that got me heavy into knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
I became interested in that. My nickname in junior high was a scientist. It was not the most flattering. It was not the most flattering because it literally meant that you were a nerd, But I didn't mind because I got a kick out of it. It kind of balanced things out for me, in the sense that I had an accent. I was poor.
Mm-hmm.
But yet I know science, I had something that maybe other people were lacking. So I kind of like balanced things out. It made me feel a little bit more wholesome.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty.
Yeah, it seems like you were really well read back then. You were reading all kinds of things that most people that age weren't into.
Yeah, no, I actually created a telegraph from one side of my street to the other side of the street through a wire, so I could keep up in touch with my friends with a telegraph that we built together. So I learned the Morse code in order to communicate.
That's pretty impressive. How old were you when you did that?
13, 14, 15.
Wow.
I would have called you the scientist too.
Yeah. But that's not all of it, right? So what happens when you're a minority person living in an impoverished community is that oftentimes issues of security come up, much more often than you want to hear about. I had 3 sisters, all of them teenagers. I was afraid that they might be attacked.
Mm-hmm.
I had my mother, no father. So unfortunately, I joined a gang, and then another gang, and then another gang, and then I scaled up and I became a full-time gangbanger. And for a while, I kept questioning the logic of that. I said, why am I being a gangbanger when I love science and education so much? So I went through a period of about maybe 5 years in which it was soul-searching, of trying to balance out the me that wanted to be a scientist and an educator, and the me that says I must survive in this jungle of Harlem, New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, it was a struggle, but in the end, this side won. One day I decided that I had enough of it.
What made you decide?
I saw so many people. I went to so many funerals. I heard so many people who got shot, who were stabbed, who got, overdosed. I had so many people who went to jail. I actually, because I was part of that culture, I didn't mind any of that.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I was not scared of it. I embraced it. I wanted to be a tough guy. I thought about maybe one day becoming the guy with the hat, with the little bandana, and being on the street and people saying, there's Georgie. That was my nickname, by the way. I didn't use Jorge.
Oh, okay.
It was Georgie. And people would say, here goes Georgie. He did 5 years in this prison and 5 years in this one. Don't mess with him. So I was thinking that would be the ultimate goal. To be known as a tough guy in the neighborhood, the
Un cholo, how they say in
Mexico. Yeah, the cholo, yeah.
Yeah.
And then one day I decided that, you know what, this experiment is over. Like a scientist, I looked at it as an experiment. I want to see how far I can push myself in this different world. Can I actually survive in that world? And when I learned that I could survive it, I also learned that I had limits as to what I was willing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some things that I just wasn't willing to do. Heavy drugs, hurting people, it was just not on my fiber. So I decided that after I analyzed all of the plus and minuses, I went to my high school. I asked them if they had a GED exam. And they told me that they did. And I told them if I could take it. They said, well, you can't, because it's a state-mandated law that you have to apply at the state level. Then you get a letter indicating which high school you can go and take the GED, the high school equivalency diploma. But they said, you don't look real good right now. You got 2 earrings, You look like you've been out hanging out, gang banging. We get to help you, so come back at 6 and take the exam. So they waived the requirement,
Oh, that's really nice of them.
but I didn't pass it
Oh, okay.
by 1 point.
By 1 point.
really?
Wow.
Yeah.
So getting out of gang life, it was
Yeah.
a cognitive decision. You thought about it a lot and reflected on it. Getting into it, did you kind of just naturally slip into it, or was it something you also considered heavily?
You mean joining?
Yeah.
It happened almost by accident. We spent a lot of time going in and out of school and standing in front of the buildings in New York City. It was part of the, I guess, hanging out culture, we call it. So people would come by with jackets and colors in the back, and they would often make comments, and we would make comments back. And eventually, one of those guys came by and told me that they've been talking about me in the group, and they thought that I would make a good member. And I told him why. I said, because you're like the tallest. So it was not that I was the meanest.
You're gonna make us look good.
Yeah,
If you're
yeah.
trying-
I look a little taller than the others. I said, oh, okay. So I joined in, and then we practiced karate. We started getting colors, and we did all the different things. And then we had a club, and we had an ID. I still have my ID at the office here at Wayne State. And then I scaled up. We started, from riding bikes and going to Central Park and cause trouble, all the way to negotiating with the Hells Angels and other groups that were
Wow.
high up, because that's the muscle for us. We had alliances with different groups for different issues. So when we had problems, we knew that we could count on that gang, and that gang, our allies, and that gang are the enemies. And so it was an experience. I became the treasurer
The treasure.
because I was too much of a scientist, and I never really learned karate. I made it all the way to the white belt.
Okay. So you
White
you
belt
got-
is the first
the
level.
first
right?
level, right? Yeah. So you took karate classes? You guys
I
went to
took
karate
karate.
classes?
Yeah. I have friends who were black belts, purple belt, brown belt.
Mm-hmm.
I also practiced boxing with people that were golden gloves. Yeah, and it was part and parcel of living in the hood. That's what you do. You do all these things,
Mm-hmm.
self-defense and also peer pressure.
Right.
But eventually, I left that behind. I didn't have much of a difficulty convincing my gang. Unlike other members who had to go through a line and you get beat up on your way out, you get beat in and beat out. I don't know if you heard about that. When you join a gang, they make a row on both sides, and you go in the middle and they punch you. If you cry and say stop, you're not a member anymore. You didn't make it. So you had to take it. Then you're a member. When you leave, you got to go through the same experience.
And what happens if you cry? You can't leave?
Well, no, you usually leave. They're just
Okay.
going to give you a parting gift of punches and kicks.
Okay.
But in my case, I was fortunate enough that I was high enough in the group, and I used my brains. I used my knowledge to my advantage, and I convinced the group that we're doing something good here. We're going to take down drug dealers. We're going to eliminate blight. We're going to eliminate abandoned homes. But we started taking down drug dealers. We started taking their drugs and flushing it.
Wow.
Yeah, and until the Colombian cartel reminded us that that was a no-no.
Yeah, I can't imagine that'd be popular.
No, they came down the block, and these guys, they had
So y-
heavy-duty weapons.
So
and-
your gang became like an anti-gang?
Yeah, they were not happy with our new formula. And so we had to negotiate a way out because we couldn't back down. Obviously, you don't
Right.
do that. So we made a deal where if you don't sell in this many blocks that we control, then you go ahead and keep using your poison, but you cannot use your poison in our neighborhood. We will not interfere in those blocks, but if you mess in our block, we will continue to take it away from your local dealers.
Mm-hmm.
And that we entered into that agreement and that ended the conflict.
Wow. That's
And then from there, I decided that it's time for me to leave. It's getting too hot.
mm-hmm.
And by that time, I had lost friends, and in jail or dead. And so that's when I went to the high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I told my buddies, I'm going to take the cause that we started here of cleaning out the neighborhoods and empowering ourselves to a different level. And they agree. And I went to community college, and that was the beginning of my change.
That's amazing. I mean, you did all that when you were 17, 18?
Yeah, I started college at, I think it was 1974. I was 20.
20.
I was already older, by the standards.
Mm-hmm. Well, you were already street smart, as they say, right?
Yeah, I think so. But I was also in a hurry. I couldn't afford to fool around. You know how sometimes in college students take their time, and I want to take this class, I'll drop it. I don't want to take summer. I took everything. I took 15 credits. I took every summer section, and I graduated with honors from a very sophisticated college with my limited English language skills, and because I was driven. I had no options. It was either go back to the gang and make my mother suffer, or succeed in college and show her that I had changed.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to succeed. It was not. I didn't have a choice.
So when you were 20 years old in college, did you fit in with the other 20-year-olds, having been a gang
No,
member?
not at all. Especially because in the community college I did, because everybody was like me, right? They're all working class, poor. They don't have money. We cannot afford the textbooks, stuff like that. So we were alike in that sense. And many of the students in the CUNY system are minorities. So you find a lot of Puerto Rican, Hispanic, Dominicans, and so on. In the upper New York State system, the SUNY system, is different. And the colleges are in the suburbs, way up there. It's like going to the Upper Peninsula here. And so I didn't have any connections with the students in that campus. And I pretty much stayed by myself until I found out that we had a Latino group and a black group. And then I started getting closer and closer. And then I did the same thing that I was doing in New York City. I became more or less like the leader of the group, and I'm going to invite professors to do talk. I'm going to do the radio program. I created the first Latin American music program in '78. And it's still around. It's now called Radio Patria, Homeland Radio. And
cool.
yeah.
So nowadays, if you're in like a staff meeting and let's say things are not going the way you want them to go, do you ever resort back to your gang style?
Well, let me put it this way. When I got out, I remember making a pledge that I was going to leave my old persona behind.
Mm-hmm.
I made a very conscious pledge. You might wonder how and why. One of the things that I did when I was a gang member was that I had a local folk healer in my community, and I would go to her for advice. And she told me, the way you're going to end up in jail or dead. And I asked her, can you give me a better plan than that? I don't like the plan that you just outlined. And she said, there are ways for you to improve, but you must give up your old persona and adopt a new one. So she gave me more or less some direction. And once that direction was given, I decided that I'm going to change. She was very knowledgeable in folk religion. And she actually did what they might call a cleansing ceremony. In Mexico, they call it limpieza.
Limpieza.
Where people would come with incense around you, they pray and stuff like that. I don't believe in any of that personally, but I respect it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when she said, I can get you started on a new you if you're interested, but you have to give up your old persona. So I did. I thought I pledged to give up my whole persona.
And you were reborn, basically.
I was reborn essentially
Yeah.
as the educator that I always was,
Mm-hmm.
right, from the little kid. And so I never turned back, and I abandoned my old ways. And I made that pledge, and I never violated it.
Mm-hmm.
And so even now, when I get into situations that are like you described, let's say road rage or something,
Right.
I'm not the one that lowers the window and says, meet me in the corner, park. Right? I don't do that. I say, bye. I'm on my way to Wayne. I have a class. You fight with your own demons. Leave me alone.
Have you stayed in touch with your friends from back then?
I did. Initially, I would go back periodically during Christmas, during the summer session, during the spring break to New York City and check up on the hood. But then I came back with the same conclusion over and over. Indio is dead, Cano got stabbed, and the other guy is heavy-duty heroin. Go the next month or 3 months later, whenever, and that guy that with the heroin, he overdosed and he died. The guy that got stabbed, somebody shot him and he's gone. So I decided that this is ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing to come back to.
Right.
If I keep coming back, I'm going to appropriate the old persona, and I was not willing to do that.
Have you been the only one that has been able to escape, I guess?
No, there are others. I'm fortunate. I actually kept in touch with another one of my gang members who became a full-time psychologist.
Oh.
And he teaches in Iowa. He was a renegade. That was the name of my last gang, the Renegades of Harlem. So
Pretty cool name.
He was a Renegades of Harlem Jr., I was a regular Renegades. In other words, he was younger and I was older. And I kept in touch on the internet. We have websites for gangs that you can actually access and ask people questions. And he put in a little bit of information about, I was a member of the Renegades and I changed my life. I studied psychology and I am now a full-time professor of psychology at this university. I contacted him and we both had like a mental shake of the hand, like, man, you too. We got out of the hood and we both did something good with our lives. That's excellent.
Mm-hmm.
But another guy became a priest in Florida. Other people became prison wardens. I know at least 2 of them. I know one guy at the university that I attended in upstate New York who did management, had like an MBA degree. He was very proud of that.
Mm-hmm.
We were on the opposite sides, though. In other words, he was the member of a gang that we were enemies against. But in college, we talked about it and he said, my God, I can't believe that you were on the other side. I said, neither do I. Oh, let's go study together. And we started tutoring each other.
That's pretty cool.
It's one of those moments, we looked at each other and said, you were in that, yeah, the one where the guy shot and did, that one. I was the enemy. I was on the other side. You want to have coffee? I think all of those are experiences that I think about a lot. I reminisce about those moments. But I also, as I spoke to my children, because my children are now older, right? I have a 31-year-old. I have granddaughters. As I remember telling my children about it, I sometimes felt that I said too much, because I don't want them to think that this is a glamorous thing to imitate.
Right.
You don't want your children to think that if you did something crazy, that as your son or daughter, that they ought to, I want to follow that steps.
They have to trump it, right?
Yeah. I said, no, please don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So my children have embraced a non-violent approach to life also. Although one of them likes to hunt. I don't like hunting. I don't like hurting animals.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of my pledges, never to use violence. So to me, even hunting is violent. I even have a hard time fishing. I don't mind catching the fish, and but I have a hard time thinking that maybe I just took that poor fish life. Maybe not. Maybe I'll just fry him. maybe I'm thinking too hard.
Well, one of our religious listeners is my mom, and she texted in a question directed to you, Dr.
Okay.
Chinea, and she said if your mother was ever concerned about your previous behavior, and does she have anything to do with changing your mind?
She was a friend of the folk healer. So she's the one that talked to the folk healer on my behalf.
Mm-hmm.
So she actually got the ball started. When you're young, and this is something that all mothers know, right? Sometimes you cannot get across your own children, but you could find resources and people that can get to those children's minds. And that's what my mother did. My mother looked for people in social work, teachers, a priest, and the folk healer in an attempt to find people that will be a buffer between her and us.
Mm-hmm.
And so my mother got the ball rolling with that lady, and I visited her, and she became my second mom. And she always told me, your mother is over there, that's your real mom.
Right.
But I'm here because I know that you sometimes cannot communicate well with your mom,
Mm-hmm.
but I can translate. And so she was my go-between. I would complain to her, and she would translate to my mother.
Mm-hmm.
It's not English translation, it's just more like,
Feeling.
yeah. And so that was really good. I really cherish that. It's something that there ought to be more of that in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
As an educator, do you ever play that role for students?
I have on occasion done that. It's part of the culture of being a good educator is being concerned about the entire student, not just the student who's in the classroom, but about everything that they do. And in fact, when I started as the director of the Center for Latino and Latin American Studies at Wayne, one of the things that I did was to put into place staff members, who were familiar with the non-academic issues that our students face. Anything from financial aid to immigration status, to living in the hood, to having sibling issues, anything, because I keep telling them that we are not going to be able to help students who are carrying a baggage of challenges that
Mm-hmm.
impede their academic progress because they're so worried about their situation at home that they cannot concentrate on learning. And I had that, so I know it's real. And so I have an open door policy. I'm constantly at the office. People who come by, we could talk. I still have a little bit of psychology background. But we had good people too, and a lot more people are embracing that idea. So it's not just me anymore, it's a lot of people. I wish it was more common though. I wish more faculty would go out of their way to help students, but unfortunately, in major universities, faculty are rewarded for their grant applications, for their scientific discoveries, for their publications. They're not rewarded as much for linking up with students,
Mm-hmm.
other than in the classroom. Not only, but they're not as rewarded.
And by rewards, you mean?
At Wayne State, you get evaluated for your profession in 3 different ways: your publications, your teaching evaluations, and what's the other one? Teaching, research, and service.
Mm-hmm.
The first 2 carry the most weight in some departments, and in others, again, it depends. If you're in psychology, service is going to be important, right? But if you are in mathematics, for example, or some of the other fields where the emphasis is on developing research and publications and grants, the service tends to be a less of an incentive for the faculty in those units
Mm-hmm.
because you want to be known, right? You want to get that grant for your laboratory so that you can fund your project, and then you hope to be able to publish that. To the extent that you publish and you do research and you get grants, you get more props at Wayne. And so we had done more than many institutions in the area of teaching, but we can still do more.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think with that, we can start our off-topic segment. Jake, what do we have today for dessert?
Well, our sponsor for today. Well, first I want to mention our sponsor that we have with us today is Blue Bunny Ice Cream. They sell it by the pint. It's very nice of them. It's a little too much to eat by yourself, but if you split it, it's great. It's made with fun as well, as it says on the package. And we also have a second sponsor today, all the way from Kalamazoo. We've got Papa Bino's Pizza Shop. Papa Bino's has been making pizza since 2 years ago, and it's run by a fitness enthusiast who is claims to have the biggest biceps in all of Kalamazoo. That remains to be seen. So that's our sponsors for today. I'm going to
Okay.
open them out now.
And remember to send us any questions you may have for Dr. Chinea or ourselves throughout our phone number. It's 313-451-2909. Again, that's 313-451-2909. All right. So, Dr. Chinea, what's your craziest or weirdest experience that you've had at Wayne State so far in all your years here?
One time I was robbed. It was an attempted robbery, but I did not give up my money.
Mm-hmm.
It just happened. I was walking out of Old Main, and two guys intercepted me at the corner of, I guess, Cass and Warren, and they told me that I was under arrest. And I said, excuse me? He says, yes, you are under arrest. And I said, why? And they said, for walking the streets. And one of them had the hand inside his jacket. And he said, now I need to have your keys, your wallet, and your money. And so, being that I'm very streetwise, the question why I'm under arrest was part of my strategy to defeat them. And so by the time they verbalized why, the response to one question why, I had already eyeballed my escape route. So I had seen that the traffic was not there. The road was totally clean, and in the way that they were verbalizing why and had your keys, I already had taken 3 steps back, and I was in the middle of the street. And I ran across to the library, to the undergraduate library. I called on the phone. I told them that I was just a victim of an armed robbery on that corner. And within 2 minutes, the police was already picking me up at the library.
Wow.
2 minutes, I was shocked. I didn't know that. And by the time the cruiser drove to the corner, they already had 3 sets of guys against the corner, against the wall, all of which were innocent. So I told the cops, I gave you a description. Those guys don't fit the description. You got the wrong people. You got to let them go. And so at first I asked them, did you stop those 3 sets of men because of the phone call that I made? They say yes. I said, those don't meet the description. You got the wrong people.
Mm-hmm.
And so they let them go, and then we drove around campus, up and down different streets, and we finally found the guys on 75 and Warren, at the entrance of 75, and they got stopped.
Okay, so you
And
did
then,
find it.
yeah, but I didn't press charges.
No?
Nah, they were high schoolers. I didn't want to ruin their lives. The cop was mad at me. They said you should have pressed charges. They could have had a weapon. It's called strong arm robbery. They don't have to show you a weapon. All they had to do is make the threat that they have a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
That is strong arm robbery. And you should have filed charges. And I said, nah, I didn't want to ruin them. I was 15 once, and I did a lot of crazy stuff. And maybe they, by being stopped by the cops, that may send a message.
Right.
So I think we've done enough. So I didn't file a charge.
That was pretty cool what you did there. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't want to get them in trouble. I thought about their mother, and imagining my mother going to court to defend me for something stupid that I did. So I figured I didn't want to ruin that mother and those children's careers. Hopefully they learn something, right? And hopefully that will put a stop to that. But no, I have positive experiences. We met the president of Mexico who came visiting us.
Yeah.
I actually met him twice. President Fox of Mexico, Vicente Fox. We had him in I think it's 2011 or 2012, and then we had him in 2018.
Yeah, this year.
Yeah. And in both cases, I took pictures with him.
Did you talk to him personally?
Yeah. No, we had some really good experiences. I would say that, having participated in the search committee for the one of the presidents of Wayne State, that was one of the high moments in my life. Organizing programs for the universities is the thing that keeps me going. So we have an Academia del Pueblo coming up April 20th or 19th or 20th. I don't know if we could find it on the...
I could find it if you would like to talk about it while I find the date.
Basically, the Academia del Pueblo is a new forum that we created about maybe 8 years ago to give the university students at Wayne State an opportunity to practice public speaking and research. And so rather than just take a class and say you got an A, a B, whatever, you can present a poster board or at a panel presentation on campus and get an opportunity to look the part of a scientist or a research person in public. You put that in your resume. It also enhances your chances of getting a job later on. And so we started doing this, and we collaborate with the community. So we have folks from the community who come in, they join the panels. We collaborate with corporations because some of the students actually do the project at a corporate partner group, like DTE or Comerica or the Detroit Tigers. And then they get to present the results of the project, the internship at the Academia del Pueblo. And I think this is going to be a really, really good one. This is our 8th year, I think, 8th or 9th year.
It's the 9th one, and it's actually Saturday, April 21st.
21st, yeah.
Yep.
So everyone is welcome. It's a free conference, no cost. We pay for parking, and we pay for food.
Sounds like a good time.
All they have to do is register online, let us know that you're coming. If people want to bring kids from the high school to learn, they're welcome as well.
Cool. And I think with that, we end our show for today. We want to thank Dr. Chinea for being here with us today.
My pleasure, and much success in el show, Sobremesa.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.